Or what? I'll never forget that. I mean, we used to. I remember one time we went and bought a bunch of hamburgers, went to Belle Isle and watching the boats go by. You know, freighters, just eating hamburgers, and that was a good time for us. A nickel apiece, you know. And then in 1940, I went to work at Ford Motor Company, and I was working in the plastic division, doing injection molding. And there I used to see the old man Ford, the owner of the Ford Motor Company, original owner. I used to see him come by almost every morning. And then I used to see Henry Ford II when he used to be in the Navy, and they had the barracks behind where I worked. And they used to see him at lunchtime. They used to go to the barracks, and I used to see him every day. After I worked there for almost 2 years, then Uncle Sam tapped me on the shoulder, and he says, "I need you." Yeah. So I went in the service in 1942, and I wound up in North Africa. And from North Africa, then we invaded Sicily. Well, when we invaded Sicily, I knew there was where my mother and dad were from, and I could speak the language. So when we landed in Sicily, I talked to the civilians over there to find out where the Germans were at. You know, the enemy was at. So a lot of people were afraid to talk to me because I was in army clothes, and they didn't know if I was an enemy or not, you know, toward the people, the Italian people. So I says, "No, you have to be afraid of that." I said, "My mother and dad are from here." I said, "They're from Alcamo, Sicily." So anyway, like I said, a lot of people were still afraid, you know. And from Sicily, we invaded southern Italy, and we got up to Rome, and then the Germans had the high ground, and we couldn't move, so we went back to Naples, and we invaded south of Rome, a city called Anzio, the Anzio beachhead. Yeah, yeah. And we stayed there for 4 months with our backs against the water, and we couldn't move because the Germans had the high ground, and they had a railroad gun. It was a 310 millimeter railroad gun, and we could never knock that thing out with our artillery. So finally, on June 6th of 1944, we finally moved out, and we captured and went up to Rome. A colonel from Washington came to become a general. And to become a general, you had to go into a line outfit, it's a combat outfit, to get his first star. So he wanted somebody to drive him that knew the language. So he says, "I've got about 3 men that know it," but he says, "Pirrone knows the language real well. He can read and write it." He says, "That's the man I want." So I started driving the general, and then when we finally got to Rome, he asked me how I liked the job, and I said, "Oh, I like it, it's fine." He says, "How would you like to have it steady?" I said, "Well, I don't know if the Colonel Kirwan would like that." He says, "Well," he said, "I'm taking over command." So I said, "Then I'll take the job." So I figured now I could start getting some stripes on my arm. We got to southern France. We went all the way up to where they were making an invasion of Normandy, and that's when we met up with General Patton. And General Patton was a type of officer where he didn't say, "You guys go here and do this and do that." He says, "Let's go and get it over with." And he was the type of man that says, "Seek out your enemy and destroy them before they destroy you." And that was the General Patton, a very brilliant man. I had a Jeep with an iron plating windshield, so in case the Germans, we were going somewhere and the Germans were hit that windshield, well, at least we were protected partially, and we had wings on the side of the windshield, so that any time they were shooting at us, why we were lucky, you know. And then in Germany, I think we were in the Colmar pocket. We were ambushed by the Germans, and I just can't remember whatever happened after that. All I know is the lieutenant colonel I had was Colonel Kirwan. He was shipped back to the United States and to Fort Lewis, Washington. He was wounded bad. For me, I don't remember nothing after that. I remember my Jeep was blown up, and I was wounded but didn't know about it. And I still don't know till this day what happened to me. There's a lot of time that was just lost. I got out of the war, it was 1945, and 2 years later, 1947, me and my wife Josephine got married. Her father and mother were from the same hometown my dad was from, and the grandfather used to work with my dad on the farms because they all come from the same area. They all know each other from Italy, from Sicily.
He knew
So that
when they grew up together.
see, we grew up together. I knew my wife's family. They were compadres with my mother and dad. You know, he was our milkman, and yet he was real close to my dad and my mother. You know, and then your grandfather, and your grandmother.